Hello, welcome to Free Will, Science, and Religion. I'm Chandler Klebs, and I'm here with George Ortega, and I wanted to continue our discussion about pantheism and, the consciousness and intelligence of the universe, because in a previous episode, George, Michael Lasser, and I were all talking about it. And I've found the subject fascinating, and I've been on YouTube listening to people describe pantheism and stuff. And consciousness and intelligence are just very interesting subjects in and of themselves. And obviously, I tend to attribute consciousness and intelligence in some form to pretty much all living things. And so I'm really wondering, like, where the difference is between like what George thinks, what I think, or if it's just a semantic difference of words to mean the same thing. Because George, here's my question for you: is the universe an animal?
No, I would have to say no. I don't think we can define the universe as an animal because I think an animal has very distinct, specific criteria for its definition, right? I mean, like
Like for example, when I think of an animal, I'm definitely thinking of something conscious and intelligent in many senses. But because of the fact that the only thing that I can think of is I think about terms of animals and perhaps even these other plants to an extent, I see their behavior, which shows that they're aware of their environment and respond to it. But I'm wondering how the difference between the and a conscious universe, if that's the case, if the universe is really conscious, I'm wondering how would that, like, is there an analogy to describe that to somebody with my type of thinking?
let's deal with consciousness first, and then we'll move on to intelligence because I think we can demonstrate that if we showed the universe to be intelligent, then we would show the universe must be also conscious, as an entity. But so like with consciousness, can we agree that consciousness is most fundamentally awareness? To be conscious of something is to be aware of something.
Yes. So that's the thing is if you're aware of something, that means you know what's going on. There's something you know. For example, it's only when you become aware of, say, something that's happening over in Africa. It's happening, but through the internet or through some other means, I become aware of what's happening over there, which otherwise I would not be aware since I don't live there at the time.
Exactly. So then, like, the first point would be I would posit that, for example, a single cell, it's aware of sunlight, it's aware of heat, it's aware of cold, it's aware of food sources. It'll identify a food source and engulf it and digest it. So, like, through that kind of like example, I think I would have to attribute consciousness also to the cellular level. Cells seem to be conscious of their surroundings.
Yes, and George, as you know, I tend to think of individual cells, the individual cells that make up our bodies or the microorganisms that these single celled things, I tend to see them as conscious. And a lot of that's just from their behavior and what I've learned just, about the immune system and how it develops resistance when exposed to a certain bacteria, some disease, it builds up an immunity to it. And so I see a system working here that seems intentional, very intentional, and intelligence seems to go along with something being intentional, affixed to a problem, but also the main reason that I attribute consciousness all the way down to the smallest of matter that we could know is because I don't see consciousness as something that emerges as a byproduct of unconscious forces, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. All right. So we've kind of like we've extended the idea of consciousness beyond animals, right? We have to recognize that single cells are conscious. And then again, like consciousness being awareness. Now think of all the chemical processes in nature. Think of the laws of nature, gravity, for example, how two objects are pulled together by these particles. They have never actually even found a gravity particle yet. It's something that still eludes us, but we know something, some force is pulling objects together. Again, when we further extend this concept of awareness, I think we'd have to logically conclude that these gravity particles, these forces in nature, would have to be aware of the objects that they're acting upon. In other words, like there's the electromagnetic force, the strong nuclear force, the weak nuclear force. These are forces that act on particles, and again, like they would have to be aware of the particles in order to influence them and interact with them.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of get that because just like when we know with magnets and like I used to play with magnets a lot, like as soon as something is within a certain distance, it will either attract or repel some object of a certain material type. And in that sort of a way, it sounds funny, but because I tend to personify the magnet as like, well, this magnet likes this object and doesn't like this object, so it pushes this away or pulls it to it. I know that sounds kind of funny, but that's how I look at it.
No, yeah. All right. So another point is like some people might say, well, we human beings are conscious and because like we can identify a mechanism, or maybe like even more so for intelligence. We human beings are conscious and intelligent because we understand our brain. We see the mechanism by which this consciousness arises, right? And so that they claim that like if there's phenomenon that they can't identify a mechanism for, then that phenomenon wouldn't exist. You're aware of that argument?
I'm not familiar with that actually.
Okay, that's one that the trick uses a lot. Basically, he says that he sees evidence for a mechanism for, let's say, human consciousness and intelligence, it being the brain, our neurobiology, our neural apparatus, the neurons, the connections, the physical structure of the brain. So, like, some people would say, well, the universe is not conscious because we're not aware of any kind of mechanism by which the universe can be conscious. And so, like, the answer to that kind of position is, well, for example, we are not aware in any sense of the mechanism that gave rise to the Big Bang, this first event in our universe of which we have any knowledge. So naturally, like, we can't, I think it would be wrong. It would be completely mistaken to conclude that since we're not aware of the mechanism for the Big Bang, that the Big Bang can't exist and therefore the universe can't exist.
I mean, we know the universe exists. That's very simple. But what's particularly interesting is like I get what you said. Like just because we may not know the mechanism, we may not know what all the causes are that leads to a certain thing happening, doesn't mean that that thing's not actually happening.
Exactly, Chandler. And that is, I think, the crux of the argument against, universal intelligence and universal consciousness. So, like, once we dispense with saying our ignorance of like the mechanism, in other words, like, how do we distinguish a human act as intelligent? We don't really distinguish it as intelligent based on our brain and neurology. We identify something as intelligent based on our perception, our behavior. In other words, like we see evidence of it. We'll write a book, we'll write a sentence, and in that expression, we will say, yes, this is intelligent because it shows planning, it shows order, it shows logic, shows these kinds of like manifestations. We don't really attribute intelligence to what we do based on this mechanism that must precede it.
Yeah, well, this is what's interesting because I guess when we are using the word intelligence, we generally tend to think of something that's intentional, something that's ordered. For example, like let's say that somebody has a deck of 52 playing cards on a table somewhere. And let's just say that their cat in the house jumps up on the table and knocks over the cards and they just fall over the floor. Well, now the thing is, what you have cause and effect there, but the cards are just scattered in a bizarre way, obviously. It's not the same as if you're looking at a solitaire game. You know what I'm saying? Like where the cards are arranged in a certain order and there's a pattern alternating black and red. So I guess what I'm saying is like when I think of something intelligence is I think of it as somebody was intentionally trying to do something of a particular pattern here.
Exactly. So now let's apply that to the universe, and let's apply that, for example, to our human brain. I mean, like our human brain is the most complex structure that we're aware of in the universe. Nothing that we're aware of aside from it kind of like matches its complexity. And so then we have to ask ourselves, well, there's two options for this. It could be the result of an ordered, intelligent process, or it could be the result of a random process. But to consider that our human brain emerged or evolved from a quote unquote random process in the strong sense of random, meaning uncaused, unordered. First of all, I think we can argue that nothing is uncaused, that there's a cause to everything, regardless of, what people might say. But, I mean, can you imagine? I mean, I can't fathom, you know, it would seem to take trillions and trillions and trillions of years to even approach a kind of like an organization of molecules, of atoms that would come together in such a way as to randomly create a human brain.
Yeah, see, here's the deal is one of the biggest problems is how people talk about randomness because they try to make it sound like, well, the universe happened randomly through and how evolution is supposed to random mutations. And I think that randomness word really throws people off because they literally think it means that it happened for no reason, and that's how it sounds, the kind of stuff they have. And I don't think that there is any randomness, obviously. I mean, I don't think of anything happening uncaused, which leads me to think that that I may disagree with the standard widespread idea of evolution even, which is the way, maybe it's the way they're explaining it, but it just doesn't sound right because they're making it sound like, well, these mutations happen randomly and then certain of the mutations help the organism survive better and some of them don't, but it's like they never consider that there might be a reason for that mutation, that there might be an intentional reason why the mammoth starts growing hair. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, Chandler, I agree with you. There are two uses for the word random. One is like that, it's uncaused. That's the strong sense of it. And the other is a more colloquial sense that, like, for example, if I say pick a card out of random from a deck, then you would pick one out without, any kind of like a plan or forethought. It would just be kind of like spontaneous. And so like, actually another kind of like definition of random is like with quote unquote apparent lack of order or apparent purpose, whatever. And so like Darwin was really sharp. I mean, Darwin understood that we don't have a free will. Freud understood it, Einstein understood it, and I'm pretty sure that when Darwin was using the term random, he was using it in the weak sense of like that, there's no apparent let's say mechanism. In other words, we were not aware of the mechanisms behind evolution. It wasn't only actually until our science progressed where we were able to work with genes like Mendel's peas and all that, and just like, basically understand the workings of genetics, that we came to understand the structure. So basically, even at this point, we don't know why, what causes some gene mutations to occur, but to assume, or to believe that they occur without a cause, and then to conclude that it's simply a quote unquote random, purposeless event. We have absolutely no evidence to conclude that. In other words, we don't know what the cause is, but like, since everything in the universe that we're aware of has a cause, we would have to assume that there's a cause for it. And again, like, my reasoning in the evolution debate, in terms of the randomness, and as well as in like this order and structure in the universe that kind of like signifies intelligence. It's impossible. I cannot see how order can arise or emerge from disorder. To my mind, there has to be a fundamental order to then like manifest in certain ways.
Yeah,
So,
this is
mhm.
very important, George, because see, this is, for example, a common argument that, for example, the creationists try to make. You know what I'm saying? They try to say, well, order can't come from disorder. So then, and so, it sounds insane to them to think that there's these random unconscious processes happening for no reason that creates the order that we can sense. And I agree with them on that point. The only difference, for example, between like the typical creationist, for example, is that they're trying to say that some big man in the sky is speaking things into existence and making them happen. Whereas I just tend to think that the life itself that's evolving is intentionally adapting and changing in ways that make sense to it, if that makes any sense.
Okay, well, yeah, I would naturally have to agree with you that, as, God is portrayed in the Bible in various religions, I think we have to pretty much reject that notion. I mean, basically, that notion is based on somebody a few thousand years ago having an idea, believing that it was from God, and making statements, about God, and then, even going as far as saying, well, this is the absolute truth, and it's the, eternal, unchangeable truth. So that, to my mind, is nonsense. And that's the value of science. In science, we no longer say, well, something is true because someone said it. We have to have evidence. We have to have, a logical process that supports our conclusion. So, so while I reject, the notion of this quote unquote personal biblical God, um, again, we're faced with the um, the process of causality as it relates to what we do. For example, let's say we do something and we identify it as intelligent, you know, and so what we've done an intelligent act, we've written a sentence, but we have to acknowledge, well, wait a minute, we don't have a free will, so that it's not really our sentence. We were compelled by um, by nature, and most specifically, we're compelled by this process of causality. And here's where we get to like to God, or like a pantheistic um, understanding of God. So basically, what is governing all of our intelligent acts, what's making them happen, is this process of causality. And the thing about the causality is that you have this chain of cause and effect that regresses before our brain was created, before we were created, before the planet was even created. So that you have this, like, for example, like um, millions of years, billions of years before the planet was created, the causal chain leading up to this intelligent act of writing a sentence was already set in stone. It was already like, it was inevitable that we would write that sentence, 1 billion years before the planet was created. So that's why I would attribute like, and so naturally, if you keep going back further and further, you reach the point where like the Big Bang is causing everything, and the Big Bang, as you understand, is the entirety of the universe. And so that's my reasoning for kind of like attributing this intelligence to the universe in its entirety. We have the Big Bang as the initial event that made everything happen, that caused everything to happen. So it would seem to need to be, and any act we would consider intelligent would seem to need to be attributable to the Big Bang, because it was, again, the first cause in the causal chain of which we're aware of.
Yeah, well, see, your reasoning makes sense to me, George, because first of all, we understand absolutely that free will is an illusion, that nothing's up to us, and that it's not really our intelligence or consciousness, but rather, since it regresses back before our conception, even, we realize that there's like I guess I would say that there's this one consciousness or one intelligence or whatever that has to be in all things. So I that's where how I get it is I get that there is no such thing as an intelligent being or person that's separate from the universe. Therefore, your intelligence that you're displaying in whatever act you do is a display of that same universal intelligence, that oneness.
Exactly. And this understanding of our universe, it doesn't require the biblical God. It doesn't require belief. It doesn't require faith. It's simply logical, you know.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
so yeah,
it's something you can get to, and it doesn't take any indoctrination, it doesn't take an ancient book. It's just something that you can reasonably conclude once you understand causality.
exactly. So then the relevance of this understanding that goes far beyond this issue of free will, we were talking about like the difference between science and religion. I think, religion can be a very useful aspect of our civilization, of humanity. Unfortunately, it has been corrupted by a system that's belief based. That it's simply, it has no more evidence except that somebody a few thousand years ago said this. So, like, to the extent now that we, because like my concern is, if we think that getting people to reject the notion of free will is difficult, at least here in the United States, I think it'll be a lot more difficult to get people to reject the notion of God, you know. And so, like, I think from that perspective, if we can define God as the universe, aside from everything, and then basically just like say, well, here's the thing. Our understanding of God is no longer going to be based on, and again, it's a pantheistic God, God and the universe simply being synonymous, but like our understanding of God is no longer going to be based on on authority, quote unquote, on like the fact that somebody a long time ago said something, and like we are going to have faith or believe that it's true just because of this, that makes no sense. So like if we shift from that kind of guiding principle in our religion to an evidence-based religion, that like, fine, we're going to have religious beliefs, but they're going to come about through reason and science. And then, actually, when we get to that point, we kind of the line between religion and science, I think, vanishes, because like that's what science does. So it's kind of like science, delving into the spiritual matters, the matters of like, of God and religion and all, using logic instead of the traditional religious system of belief and faith.
I would say that pantheism is actually in conflict with the currently established religions, because what they have is there's a separation. There's God's will and then there's our will, and that they're not the same thing. So that like there's some kind of a separation that God is a human that is angry and attributing free will to the other humans that he supposedly created, which is very bizarre, because what you have a case there is you have a free will believing human, which is the image of God that the other religions have.
Exactly, exactly, Chandler. That's a great point. Basically, we don't manifest our will, we manifest God's will. There is no separation there. And I think there's another kind of separation that exists in conventional religion is a lot of religions believe that God is transcendent. Now, like to my mind, transcendent is an incoherent concept when related to God, because if you define God as everything, which is the same definition we ascribe to the universe, everything means everything. You can't have anything transcending or existing outside of everything.
Yeah, see, yeah, my problem is that when they say that God is outside of everything, God is outside of the physical world, outside of space, time, and causality. So basically, they're saying God exists outside of existence, which roughly is synonymous with God does not exist.
Yeah, you're right. It has no logical structure, and that again, like that's the problem with our religions today. They come up with these like nonsensical notions that are simply like incoherent. There's no logic or evidence to support them.
Yeah, and I really would like to see, like, for example, even though there's a lot of atheists, and that they see what's wrong with religion, I think part of the problem is it gets focused on the negative sense. It gets focused on what they don't believe rather than what they do believe, and then people ask them, well, what do you believe? And so it's sort of like, if somebody just described themselves as an ametist instead of a vegetarian, like you're saying, well, here's what I don't eat. Well, then what do you eat? So I like the idea of focusing on the positive, what we do believe, what we can know through science and our logic. Just I like that because you're focusing on the positive rather than negative. It's sort of weird. It's like if somebody says that, well, I have a cup and my cup does not contain lemonade. Well, that doesn't tell you anything. It doesn't tell you if it has orange juice, apple juice, coffee, water, whatever. Like, how do you know? So you have to. It's better to say, well, this is what is in the cup, rather than saying, well, my cup doesn't have this, so my cup is an A lemonadist cup.
No, yeah, I understand. I think perhaps a better term than atheist may be pantheist, but like that's somewhat incomplete in that like I think the guiding force of atheism is really its rationalism. In other words, like basically atheism uses rationalism to attack the false beliefs of religion. In other words, like atheism is guided by reason, whereas like conventional religions, these definitions of God are guided by nothing that you can't define it as reasonable. I mean, it may make sense in a certain with a certain perspective that let's say if our ancestors believed in something before the advent of science, then it kind of may have made sense to trust that our ancestors were right. But again, now in our modern scientific age, that reasoning no longer holds.
Yeah, and we passed our 30 minutes, so we might want to close this episode soon, but we've talked about a lot, and after this we could do more going into the difference, particularly between atheism and pantheism, because I think it's very, very slight.
That sounds great. Okay.
You've been listening to Free Will, Science, and Religion with Chandler Klebs and George Ortega, talking about atheism, pantheism, consciousness, intelligence, the lack of free will, causality, and all that fun stuff. Hope you've enjoyed listening, and stay tuned for more. Bye.